bringing a beautiful greenscape together. We can also consider the kinds of herbs that we use in our gardens as well. I think herbs are probably, you know, they're always kind of a staple that we bring into the garden, all these different aromatic herbs that we can bring in, but they also have this amazing ability to be, you know, quite incredible when we're designing a garden as well. So take these couple of little herbs here. So just as an example, I've got a beautiful rosemary here. Again, I wish you could smell this. It's just amazing. You know, it's got such a strong smell. But anything like rosemary, lavenders, all those kinds of things, thyme, beautiful thymes, also have like a really amazing kind of design element to them. Like look at that darling little flower on the thyme. So these are all herbs like this, like rosemary. This is actually a prostrate rosemary, so it crawls along the ground, making an excellent kind of ground cover. And I've even got something quite cute here. This is a caper bush, so incredibly hardy, drought tolerant, needs to be very, very well drained. But look at that beautiful lush foliage that you see. It's quite succulent, got this amazing, beautiful kind of rounded leaf. Like there's nothing to say that a lot of these beautiful herbs, things like little Greek mountain teas, oregano, all these beautiful things can be design elements in our garden as well. And when I think about that, you know, when I think about, you know, not only perennial herbs and vegetables, you know, being able to be edible and ornamental in our garden, I also think about, you know, the different kinds of climates. Like if you've got a full sun position, a courtyard, like I've got a little courtyard just out there, it's full sun, it gets very hot down here. And I've actually got some grapevines growing in it. It's very simple, it's classic, but it's also something of using edible and ornamental together. They can kind of do two jobs at the same time. And not just like, it's not just great, you know, it's not just grapes when we think about edible climbers that we can incorporate into our garden. There's also a huge range of different kinds of edible climbers that you can get out there. You know, things that are annual, like climbing red malabar that has this big green lush leaf. Things like hops, which is used in home brewing, kiwi vines. You know, there's a whole selection of different kinds of climbers that we can use in our garden that are edible but also ornamental. And I do want to give a bit of a shout out to different kinds of shrubs and fruit trees as well, because we often, you know, often there is some kind of edible equivalent to something that we want to happen in our garden. Like I live in a cooler climate, you might be living in Queensland or, you know, Northern Western Australia or somewhere a lot warmer. But, you know, part of the thrill of kind of being in Victoria in autumn is having all of that amazing kind of autumn colour that comes through. And it's also things like pomegranates, persimmons, blueberries. These are all edible shrubs and small trees that not just only have their, you know, beautiful edible quality to them, but they've also got amazing ornamental foliage as well in autumn that have all these beautiful crimson tones in it as well. So, you know, there's not just like if you're wanting to have a particular thing in your garden or a feature in your garden, there may be an amazing kind of edible equivalent that you can use. And that's especially true when it comes to small trees as well. So these are three really hardy examples, but, you know, something that's really quite classic. So we've got a little olive branch here. So a great, you know, often it can be a little bit weedy if you live in bushland, so that's something to be a little bit mindful of, but an incredibly resilient tree that can be used for all different kinds of things. You can espalier it, you can clip it, you know, you can create beautiful hedges with it. There's all different things that you can do with this edible tree. And it's not just that, but it's also things like, I've sacrificed a little bit of my fig tree to show you today. A lot of love for all my gardeners today, but you can see this. This is my gorgeous, a little branch from my gorgeous fig leaf. You can see how beautiful it is, like that beautiful leaf form there. And over summer, if you're lucky enough to have experience with fig trees, or if you've got a fig tree yourself, you know that they get all of this amazing lush green growth over them during the summertime. They look so, you know, they just look so lush and gorgeous and green, and they're such hardy Mediterranean trees as well. And it's things like figs, anything else that's Mediterranean, like pomegranates, like I've mentioned before, but also a lot of citrus trees as well, that they're really amazing examples of edibles that you can use to create structure in your garden with a small tree. They're also things that you can grow in a pot too. And it's great to remember that, because often, like I'm very lucky to have my own garden now, but I haven't always. It's only been in the last 2 years that I've had my own garden. So I've been dragging my fruit trees around with me everywhere, much to the dissatisfaction of my partner. But, you know, there are plenty of options that you can have of different fruit trees if you're, you know, you're in a particular garden, or you're renting, or you've just got a courtyard where you can actually still have some structure. You can have something that takes up a bit of space and creates a bit of a feature, but, you know, you've got that beauty and you've got that edible quality to it as well. And this is a gorgeous thing as well. Awesome. So another little treat. So you may or may not be familiar with this one. This is actually a little stem off a quince tree. And you can see just how beautiful that is, like that beautiful, gorgeous blossom that's formed, but then all of those big, lush green leaves as well. Like, what's not to love about that? Something that's edible, that, you know, is really hardy, quite incredible, but, you know, really is quite tolerant of heat, and is just beautiful and produces that fruit too. So there's lots of options to consider. And, you know, a lot of the wonder around a lot of climbers and fruit trees, when you think about, you know, creating a beautiful greenscape in your garden, is that you can actually use them in different ways. So you can espalier a lot of fruit trees. You can train climbers over garden sheds, or over arches, or along walls, or long fences, and to coat, you know, an ugly shed or anything like that, to coat it in green. There's lots of different options you can use. As well as, you know, there's just so many different things that you consider to use these guys for. Excellent. Great. Awesome. Now, I know I'm flying through things, but we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. There is just, like, I've given you some different, you know, design ideas when we're thinking about edibles and ornamentals. I'd also just like to mention, when some of those examples that I've used, like Mediterranean herbs like thyme, rosemary, quinces, they're all really sun-loving plants. And I'm like you, like some of us are lucky to have a garden that has a lot of full sun, and some of us don't. So sometimes, you know, we might have quite a shaded courtyard or a different position. And if you are living in a slightly warm climate where you are experiencing a lot of shade, you can still apply some of these design ideas, but by using subtropical trees. Subtropical trees are sometimes a little bit more tolerant of shade conditions, as long as they're kept nice and warm, or they're in a warmer environment. So when you think about verbacos, or, you know, bananas and things like that, that have that beautiful green lush foliage and look quite amazing, there's beautiful varieties of bananas too that have that, you know, big red trunks and beautiful red stems and stuff, really beautiful. But they're also something that can be a little bit more tolerant if you've got, you know, a bit of a shaded position. Shade is probably one of the hardest things to work with when we consider a lot of our edibles that we might want to use in a garden. But there are different options, like a lot of Asian greens, different kinds of Asian herbs like Vietnamese mint. They can be a bit more tolerant of shade conditions. And so, you know, kind of keeping that in mind when you're thinking about a plant selection to bring together into your garden. Because this probably brings, like, through a really kind of important kind of horticultural point, that healthy plants equal a happy garden. So I think and I've actually got a bad example of a very sad indoor plant just over there. But beauty, really, you know, you can really tell that a lot of the beauty that is in these broad beans or any of these herbs is because they're very healthy plants. And so if you're looking after your plants and trying to keep them as healthy as possible, that's when they'll be at their most beautiful. And so when we're pulling a garden together, and don't get me wrong, like I know I'm a horticulturist that works at the Diggers Club, but I do occasionally kill plants, but don't tell anyone. I think we all do as gardeners, we're all learning, and sometimes those plants just don't make it. But, you know, when we can do our best, if we learn, when that kind of happens, if we continue to learn and develop our skills as gardeners, you know, and consider the microclimates that are in our garden as well. So often you'll hear horticulturalists and gardeners talk about microclimates in their garden, and I'll just explain it. So I've got a little house here and I've got a north-facing courtyard there. So north-facing courtyard gets a lot of sun, you know, gets a lot of direct light. There's a big brick wall out there. It's a real kind of, it captures a lot of that heat. And then on my other side of my house, I've got this really south-facing courtyard. So it doesn't get a lot of sunlight, you know, does not get a lot of heat, very cold, very, very shaded. So I might like live in Victoria in a particular climate, but the two different sides of my house have two incredibly different climates. And so I think part of the success that I have, and that you can have too, is when you're choosing plants or considering how to garden and what to garden with, is to really think about the microclimates you've got in your backyard, shading of trees and shading by walls and fences and reflected light. These can all kind of create a different kind of microclimate. And you might even be in a garden that has two different types of soil as well. So one area might be really clay and another part of your garden might be really sandy. And so that creates a different situation as well. So you've got all these different microclimates. And so, you know, when you want to have really healthy plants, thinking about these plants first, and then choosing plants that will really thrive in those environments. So for example, you know, with my grey shady, shady courtyard, I've got a lot of shade loving plants, a lot of different kinds of Asian herbs and things like that. But then in my hot courtyard, I've got lots of Mediterranean plants, olives and that grape I mentioned, and rock samphire that I've got here, things that are really tolerant. And so they're already really suited to the climate, which means taking care of them is easier, but it also means that they're more successful and they're happier and they're healthier, and, you know, they really want to survive. You know, when we think about the health of plants, you know, it's not just choosing the right location for them, but it's also about the soil. And just as a rule of thumb at the Diggers Club, we consider that we feed the soil rather than feeding the plant. And so making sure that we do as much preparation to that soil before we plant something is really key to keeping it all healthy and looking amazing. And another really important part, I think, when we think about healthy gardens, is actually having that diverse ecosystem. So having a lot of different things happening in our garden. So instead of having a monoculture in my backyard where I'm just growing one kind of crop of vegetables, having all different kinds of vegetables and all different kinds of things